Thanks. Okay, so my name is Jin Ha. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm with Social Planning Toronto. I'm the executive director here, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming all of you, and we'll be having more people join over the next little while. I'm going to start with some housekeeping. For those who need ASL, you can access the ASL channel by either clicking the More button at the bottom of the screen, or for some, you click on the Interpretation button and select American Sign Language. We also have live caption available, again, by either clicking on the More button or the Show Captions button at the bottom. If you have any trouble with any of this, please message a Social Planning Toronto staff. Melissa Wong would be a good option for that if you need help. So we'd like to remind everyone to please be respectful of everyone while communicating and sharing this space together. Please mute yourselves if you're not speaking to reduce interruptions, and you can do that by pressing the mic button, typically located at the bottom of the screen, or by pressing *6 if you're calling in by phone. There will be opportunities to talk and ask questions where you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, which is located at the bottom of the screen, or you can press *9 if you're calling in. We encourage you to introduce yourselves over the chat. You can share your name, your pronouns, the neighborhood you live in, and anything else you'd like to share. Please note again that we are recording this workshop, this session, this town hall, the presentation portion of the event, and we'll be sharing it out online. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the land we are on today, also known as Takaranto, and the current stewards of this land, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We acknowledge the historical relationships between the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, who have lived in this territory. I'll just give the interpreters a chance to catch up. Who have lived in this territory. This land is also home to many Indigenous nations from across Turtle Island, including Inuit peoples and the Métis Nation. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. We also want to acknowledge the ongoing forms of colonialism and state violence happening around the world, and that we all, as treaty people, have a role to play in calling out modern forms of colonialism. Many of us have come here as settlers, migrants, or refugees in this or past generations. We acknowledge those who came here involuntarily as a result of slavery, and we pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. I am a first-generation immigrant from South Korea. My family moved to Toronto when I was a baby, and I have lived in all four corners of this amazing city. It's my privilege to work for an organization like Social Planning Toronto. As we all together fight for a better city, I invite all of us, including myself, to think about the ways in which the city budget can better meet the needs of Indigenous communities and groups, from increased funding to Indigenous organizations, to housing and shelter services specifically for Indigenous communities, and more. SBT is working closely with Indigenous organizational partners to ensure we continue to improve how we embed truth, reconciliation, and Indigenous sovereignty into our work. This work continues through the budget process and, of course, beyond. So for those of you just joining, we are recording this session and we will be sharing the video out in a few days' time. Feel free to stay off camera if you prefer. And again, ASL interpretation is being provided as well as live captioning. And we encourage you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Again, I'm Jinha, the Executive Director at Social Planning Toronto. We provide research and policy analysis and support community and civic education and engagement. We work with residents, community organizations, and groups to shape the conversation about how we can build a better, more livable, just, and equitable city, and what public and community services and infrastructure investments are needed. We do this by providing just-in-time budget analysis, mainly through our City Budget Watch blog posts, bringing people together through events and workshops like this, and supporting more people to confidently participate in the city budget process. a process that can be quite intimidating otherwise, and enabling joint action. The goal of today's session is to give you details on the 2026 City of Toronto budget. As you can see from the agenda, we have a great lineup of speakers talking about different aspects of the budget. We have a lot to go through, but we still hope to have time for a Q&A. This information you get today can be used by you to learn more about what our city needs and to engage more fully with the budget process, including submitting a written or verbal presentation to the Budget Committee. You can still sign up today to depute tomorrow or Wednesday. And there are ongoing budget town halls throughout the city being held by various city councillors and partners. Check out our website for more info. Okay, so we are starting with our first speaker, who is our very own Beth Wilson. Beth is a senior researcher with Social Planning Toronto. Her research and analysis support resident engagement and advocacy to create a more equitable, just, and sustainable city for all. Beth is a key contributor of SPT's City Budget Watch and has provided analysis on the City of Toronto's budget for over 15 years. Beth, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jen, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to start with a little City Budget 101, some background on the city budget, and then I'll go into highlights from the 2026 staff prepared budget. If you want to go to the next slide there, thank you very much. So the City of Toronto's annual budget process is arguably one of the most important set of decisions that the mayor and Toronto City Council make all year. It's where they decide where the priorities are going to be set for the year and for the years to come. What's going to be funded, what programs, services, infrastructure, how much funding is going to be allocated to those programs, services, and infrastructure, and what's not going to be funded, or and also how revenues are going to be raised. And we know that city services and their support for nonprofit community services as well impact residents every day. And so these are incredibly important decisions, and community participation in the City of Toronto budget is so important. You could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So to provide some background on the City of Toronto budget is a very large budget. It's larger than many provincial budgets. The operating budget for 2026 is $18.9 billion, and they have a 10-year capital plan of $63.1 billion. The operating budget side of it is funding for the day-to-day spending on services, programs, and services, such as recreation programs, parks maintenance, public health programs, public transit operations, police, and other emergency services. And the capital budget and the 10-year capital plan are about infrastructure to support those services. So, for example, the construction and repair of transit infrastructure, the purchase of buses, streetcars, subway cars, major construction on roads and bridges, and also building and major renovation of public buildings. So, for example, the building of a new community center or recreation center, the new buildings or major renovation of libraries, all part of the capital budget, and also major renovation of parks, the creation of new parks, the development of park infrastructure. You think of a children's playground. So all part of the capital budget, and that capital investment is essential to providing programs and services. And we'll just get to the next slide. One back. Great. So The budget, the City of Toronto's budget, they have three specific budgets that are called rate supported budgets, and they are funded almost entirely by user fees. It's a little different than the rest of the budget. Toronto Water, so where people pay water bills or businesses paying water bills, which might be supported through the rents that tenants pay, for example, that's Toronto Water. Solid waste management, so garbage and green bin, for example. And we know now recycling has moved to the province and a contracted service and is perhaps a conversation for another day. But solid waste management, that are those two particular services at the moment. And then Toronto Parking Authority, the green P parking lots across the city. If you have a car, you park it in green P. The user fee is the payment you make for parking. And so the rest of the budget is considered a tax supported budget, and that's the majority of the city's budget. When we look at the 2026 operating budget, look at where does the money come from. I'm just going to run through some of those revenue sources. So property taxes, extremely important. 31% of total revenues for the city this year come from property taxes. Federal and provincial government funding, 24%. We always want to see that number increase for more support from senior orders of government. Those rate programs that I mentioned, water and green P parking and solid waste management, are 12% of total revenues. But those user fees go to pay specifically for those services. So the water bill, those user fees go specifically to Toronto Water, for example. Reserve accounts, 9%. So they draw on reserves. The city receives funding, for example, from provincial or federal government. They may use some of that funding in a given year, and then they put the rest in reserve accounts, and they'll draw on those reserves for specific purposes. Maybe it's for childcare, maybe it's for public health programs. And so reserve accounts make up 9% of revenues. Transit fares are 6% of the overall revenues for the city. But when you pay your transit fare, that specifically is going to the TTC. And then there are a number of other categories. I'm going to speak to specifically to the land transfer tax in a moment. So property taxes, and where do our property taxes go? So this graph shows a breakdown of different services that are covered by our property taxes. And these dollar figures are based on the average home in Toronto with an assessed value of just under $700,000. So the total 2026 municipal property tax bill on that home would be $4,252. If the home was assessed at a lower value, then the property tax bill would be lower. And if it was assessed at a higher value, it would be higher. So we can see transit for property taxes, it receives the largest portion of the property tax bill at 19%. Police services at just second at 18.6%. And then there are cost shared programs that make up 11.3% of the property tax bill. Some cost share programs are public health programs, for example. There's financing of the city's debt when they borrow for capital at almost 11%, and then a number of other service areas with smaller amounts as well. I want to share with you the budget process and where we're at in the budget process. So in the fall, the city had public consultations on the budget. They launched the budget on January 8th, and then the mayor and chair of the budget committee held telephone town halls January 14th and 15th. And just last week, the budget committee met to review the budget. And now, as Jen was mentioning, we have the public presentations, the opportunity for people to speak to the budget committee at deputations or hearings, and those are on January 20th and 21st. Then the budget committee meets for a final wrap up on January 23rd. And at that meeting, they will make recommendations to the mayor based on their review of the budget and what they heard at those public deputations. And they'll make recommendations of what they would like to see in this year's budget. The mayor will release her budget by February 1st, and she'll take into account what the staff prepared budget that was released on the 8th, what she's hearing from residents and communities and organizations through the budget process, and also the advice of budget committee as well. And then she'll release her budget. It's normally it is some changes are made to that staff prepared budget that's released early on in the process. So we will be looking for that. We expect to see it a few days before February 1st. And then the final date for the budget process is February 10th. City Council will meet, and they can vote to make amendments to the mayor's budget. Sometimes they have a bit of money to also allocate in the budget process as well. So now that's a bit of Budget 101 and some key dates. I'll go through some highlights from the 2026 budget. So we found that despite there being significant revenue challenges, this budget includes some targeted new investments and also safeguards significant investment that's been made in recent years. 28, just shy of 28.5 million in funding for new and enhanced services, and that is mostly funded through city revenues such as property taxes. Almost 2/3 of city revenues for those new and enhanced services are going to advance the city's poverty reduction strategy. So I'll outline a few of the revenue challenges of the city that make every year they have challenges. There are certainly some significant challenges this year. Limited revenue from TTC ridership, significantly reduced funding from the city's municipal land transfer tax, and that's a tax paid by home buyers. And we have seen the real estate market is at a 25-year low, so they have less revenue from the municipal land transfer tax as a result. The City of Toronto and municipalities in general lack the revenue tools and the powers to generate the kind of revenue that they need, particularly funds that grow with the economy, such as income tax or a share of the sales tax, for example. So there is continued need for the federal and provincial government to address those issues and to really change the structure of funding for municipalities. We also recognize that federal and provincial funding, some of that funding is expiring this year. So there's federal funding that the city has had for youth programs and for community safety programs, and those are expiring in March, which is impacting programming. The 3-year New Deal with the province that was announced a couple of years ago is expiring at the end of 2026. So negotiations are underway between the city and the province for New Deal 2.0, 3.0, a new funding arrangement with the province. So there's nothing new to report at this time on that, and that certainly affects the revenues that the city has. The provincial government also made changes in recent years to development charges, and that has significantly impacted the city's capital budget and capital funds. Because of these changes the province have made, the city estimates that they will lose annually 50 to 70 million dollars, or 40% of funds that they would have received through development charges, and they will lose that annually. So it's a huge impact on the capital plan and the infrastructure for the city. So very not helpful to, changes that have been made at the provincial level. There's also changes that delay when the city will receive those funds. And so that's having an impact on that 10-year capital plan. So lots of challenges and lots of room for new deals and new arrangements with federal and provincial governments. And I did want to say something about what the mayor and city council did late last year in response to some of these revenue challenges. They and in response to calls from many community groups and residents calling for an increase to the luxury homes tax, or the mansion tax. And They passed a motion to increase the luxury homes tax. So for people who are home buyers and they're purchasing a home that costs more than $3 million, they will have to pay a little more through the municipal land transfer tax. They'll pay a little more. And the luxury homes tax in 2026 is expected to generate 152 million, including 13.8 million from the rate increase. So it's a small measure but it's within the city's control to be able to raise more revenues, and in a small response to the deep economic and social inequities in the city as well. And those funds will help to pay for some of the programs and services in this year's budget. Go ahead, you can go to the next slide. I want to say a few words on property taxes. So this year's residential tax increase is 2.2%, and it has two parts to it. One part is a 0.7% residential property tax increase and a 1.5% increase to the city building fund. And the city building fund pays for housing and transit infrastructure. So it is a significant funder of those capital plans. And so we see that annual 1.5% increase. The residential property tax increase and the associated tax increases for all property classes will generate an additional 35 million in the 2026 budget. So total revenue is just almost 5.8 billion from property taxes, or 31% of the city's operating budget. And we see that very small property tax increase builds on more significant increases from recent years. In 2025, they generated an additional 251 million from the property tax increase and an additional 338 million in 2024. So this year's is smaller, but it is building on something where the city has generated more revenue for those very important programs and services. In terms of impact for homeowners, for that average assessed value home of almost $700,000, the increase is $91.53 annually, or $7.63 per month. So a small increase. The city also has cancellation and deferral relief programs for homeowners who are lower income seniors and people with disabilities as well, to help with the affordability issues around any property tax increases. The city Oh, if you can go back again, thank you. The city building fund, I won't go over the details, but I'll just say, this has been a significant levy to support transit and housing infrastructure. And this year's 1.5% increase will generate 75 million. It's just a significant source of funding for housing and public transit infrastructure in the city. I wanted to share with you some of the new and enhanced services in the 2026 budget that fall under poverty reduction, the poverty reduction strategy. We have amazing speakers coming up who are going to speak to a number of these issues. So I'm just going to touch on them very briefly and not go into detail on them. And so the first one is rent bank. The increase is 2.6 million, and this supports tenants with arrears and who need assistance with making a rental deposit when renting a new place. We see almost a million increase into rent safe TO program, and this is the apartment building standards where there's uh, evaluation and enforcement around apartment building standards, repair issues, for example. So we see a much welcome increase there. The air conditioner pilot program is being expanded. So last year they had a program that they started to provide portable air conditioners to low income and vulnerable seniors. So they're expanding that very successful and in demand program with $1 million, which will purchase over 1,000 portable units for vulnerable residents in multi-unit buildings. And we understand this includes families with children. And to continue with the new and enhanced services in poverty reduction, the student nutrition program has an additional 6 million in city funding, and they also expect to receive federal funding. So together, that would allow for the expansion of a significant expansion of student nutrition to 155 new school communities, serving over 327,000 children. So this year's expansion of student nutrition is on top of last year's, where there was also an additional 6 million added. And we've seen, having seen for many years student nutrition program, just tiny little increases over the years. But in recent years, we've seen a really significant expansion and real investment in the program. And good to hear that it will be supported with some federal funding as well. Camp TO nutrition program. So this is something that was started, I believe, last year. And it is to provide a nutrition program for the city's camp programs for children and youth. And so there's an additional 500,000 for 96 new camp locations, snacks for approximately 60,000 campers. TTC fare capping, and I know August will be speaking to this when they speak to the transit budget. So just to say it is for increasing affordability, it's a really great victory and it's a start. We want more. We want a more robust program, but it's a good start and I'll leave it to them to speak to. Toronto Community Crisis Service TTC pilot, this really started in 2025, and we see the funding this year to support it. And this is community crisis workers, emergency crisis workers on the TTC to support people in a non-police response to crisis that we see folks experiencing across the city and in transit. So there's funding for that as well. I know we have Brandon with the Toronto Public Library Workers Union who's going to speak about the much beloved libraries in the city and the Toronto Public Library budget. I will say there's some funding in here for new and enhanced services related to seniors and reducing social isolation, financial empowerment service. Really, one of the things that I love about this program is it connects people to the financial programs that they're entitled to and they might not know about, and assists people with low income to have access to those supports, and also social and crisis support service. We see increased funding. Most of the increased funding here coming from the Toronto Public Library Foundation in the form of donations. And lastly, in new and enhanced for poverty reduction is complimentary school trips for Toronto students to the Toronto Zoo. Um, Important to note that there are some programs and services that are new investments that are not captured by that list of new and enhanced services. Um, One is in Toronto Public Libraries, their third and final phase of expansion of the open hours plan to 17 more libraries. And so all 100 branches operating 7 days a week by summer 2026. We also see the third year of a TTC fare freeze. I can't remember that happening before. So that is good news for transit riders and expansion of transit services as well. A few notes of other budgets that might not be covered by our speakers. So one is that we do see an inflationary increase to the Community Partnership and Investment Program of 2.5%, and also going to select cultural grants. So this supports nonprofit organizations that receive community funding to maintain existing services. So inflationary increase doesn't sound too exciting, but really important because when it's not there, it means a cut to services. New investments also in community-based arts and culture programs as well. On recreation, a couple of notes we see there is a 2% user fee increase for registered recreation programs. I note that it is below the rate of inflation which is 2.5%. So we would love to see that like no increase to user fees, but I'm glad if there is one that it is not at or above inflation. It's on the lower end. Important to note that this doesn't apply for people who are in registered programs in centers where programs are free. So a number of free centers across the city, there's no user fee. And then also people who qualify with low income can register for the welcome policy for a subsidy. We also see we're pretty excited about the expansion of the early local registration for recreation programs. And this was a recognition that local residents were having a hard time being able to access registered recreation programs in their centers that were near them. So the city instituted last year local registration as a pilot project in some of the free centers. It was extremely successful in increasing access to registered recreation programs for local residents, and often in areas with high poverty rates, for example. So that early local registration will expand to all the free centers by fall 2026. And we saw from the pilot project, it boosted local registration from 24% to 67%. So people are being able to access those programs, and now it'll expand across all the free centers. Um, I wanted to say a word about accessibility issues in the budget. The City of Toronto has the Disability Inclusion Action Plan. It has divisional accessibility plans and a Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee. So they are doing work around disability justice and accessibility. I would say, however, it's difficult to assess the city's progress on accessibility and disability justice in the city budget. The budget notes are kind of hit and miss in terms of providing that kind of information. So we see the need for a stronger accessibility lens in reporting on the city, and then also um, a couple notes here where Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the AODA, there are requirements for the City of Toronto and many organizations to become more accessible, to have their services and their buildings and their infrastructure be more accessible to people with disabilities. And the goal for the province was to be fully accessible by 2025. And it's very clear, and people who know already are not surprised by the unfortunate news that the city has not met that requirement. And it's clear in the budget notes where they identify ongoing work to meet AODA requirements. So more work to be done. And we have also heard a lot from advocates who are raising concerns regarding accessible shelters, accessible and affordable housing, and also top of mind recently, clearly in particular around snow clearing as a priority and an accessibility requirement for the city. So before we turn it over to Sara, I'll just say, oh, you can go to the next slide. I'll just say and sum up that we see some important investments, right, in this budget, but we know that we have lots of residents, communities across the city that are in crisis, facing multiple crises. And the need for expansion of programs, acceleration of the expansion of programs, and more investment in key services that impacts people's quality of life is urgent and needed. So happy to see certain movements forward, but we know how much more work there is to be done. And I know the speakers to come are going to really highlight many of those issues. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Beth. Thanks for that great overview. And now we'll dive into some of the specific details with our wonderful lineup of speakers. So, next up is Sara. Sara Beyer is a policy professional with experience in the non-profit, public, and private sectors, where she has focused her practice on housing, affordability, and Indigenous settler relations. Sara is currently the Manager of Policy with the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights, where she works to advance human rights-based housing policy at all levels of government. And prior to joining the CCHR, Sara held policy roles with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association, and the Ontario Ministry of Indigenous Affairs. So Sara will present on key investments in housing and protections for renters. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thanks so much everyone for joining and to SPT for having me today. I will just bring up my presentation here. Okay. Are folks able to see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much again. And yeah, as Jen mentioned, I work with the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights, but today I'm here as a member of the Right to Housing Toronto network. So really pleased to chat a bit about key housing investments in the 2026 city budget, and with a particular focus, as was mentioned, on impacts for renters, as well as I will touch on a little bit as well some discussion around homelessness and shelter services. So just a bit about Right to Housing Toronto. We're a group of organizations and individuals working to support the city in taking a human rights-based approach to all of its housing-related work. And just a high-level overview of what I'll cover today, getting a little bit into the context around housing and homelessness in the city right now, And then diving into the budget to look at different supports that are being invested in renters and people experiencing homelessness, as well as around housing and shelter development, taking a look at some of the key outcomes and targets that the city has set, and then some initial recommendations from Right to Housing TO, but also to many of the advocates that I know are here and across the city who've been diving deep into the budget. So thank you to all of you for your support. So I think it comes as no surprise to anybody. Toronto is in the midst of a growing housing and homelessness crisis. We see rising rents, increasing evictions, few affordable options, and limited rental protections. According to the city's most recent street needs assessment, over 15,000 people were experiencing homelessness in October 2024, and that's more than double what we saw just 3 years earlier. We know that key drivers include a lack of safe and affordable housing, unmet health needs, and inadequate income, which is disproportionately impacting equity-deserving groups. Meanwhile, the most recent census data shows that nearly half of households in Toronto are renters, and over 40% of those renters are living in unaffordable housing. So that means they're spending over 30% of their income on rent. We also see that nearly 30% of renters in Toronto are in core housing need. So that means that their housing is not only unaffordable, but it's also in need of major repairs and or overcrowded. And despite a recent increase in rental housing supply, we know that rents continue to rise and remain out of reach for many households. According to recent data from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, average rents for a 2-bedroom apartment in Toronto rose by 3.5% to over $2,000 last year, and we know that asking rents are even higher than that. So while the city has important tools that it can use to help address these challenges, there are also many external conditions that some of which are beyond the city's control. So some of those include inadequate supports like social assistance rates, renter protections, things like rent control that are provincial responsibilities. And we know these things are only going to get worse following recent provincial policy decisions, such as the passage of Bill 60 and the closure of supervised consumption sites. We also see insufficient investments from federal and provincial governments to build and protect affordable housing supply and to also provide key supports such as the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit. And over the weekend, actually, we heard that the federal government is going to reduce funding for the city through the Housing Accelerator Fund by $10 million because the city did not meet one of the program requirements, which is to permit sixplexes citywide. So also issues in between governments and how those agreements are shaping up. We also see that there are poor conditions for affordable housing development, such as cost increases, trade uncertainty, and market fluctuations. And as Beth walked us through earlier, we know that the city has limited tools and powers to raise revenue. So all of that to say, the city still has committed to advancing the right to housing in its Housing Charter and Action Plan, and that means that it must prioritize and maximize investments to meet the needs of those who are most impacted by the housing and homelessness crisis. So diving into the budget, we know that we had significant investments in the 2024 and 25 budgets. And so following that, the city is proposing some modest new and enhanced funding for renters and people experiencing homelessness this year. So as Beth already mentioned, we see $2.6 million for the rent bank. This would bring the total program budget to $10.8 million and is expected to support approximately 2,800 households. Despite this increase, though, the program is targeted to support the same number of households as it did in 2025, and this is likely due to rent costs continuing to go up. We also see just under $1 million for Rent Safe TO, and this would add 11 new staff to the support program, including to implement new color-coded audit signs and ongoing inspections, enforcement, and education. We also see $1 million for the air conditioner pilot expansion. As Beth mentioned, this would provide up to 1,000 portable air conditioners for low-income and vulnerable residents, which is double the number provided in 2025. And this program is meant to complement the city's ongoing work to also develop a maximum temperature bylaw for rental units. We also see a proposed decrease of $126 million to the city's shelter system, and that is due to the planned closure of temporary hotel sites and a projected reduction in demand for refugee claimant beds. However, with homelessness growing across the province and a very volatile international environment, many advocates are concerned that this proposed decrease is premature. And then just quickly, if we compare against what we saw last year, when it came to new and enhanced funding, much less is invested in key supports for renters and people experiencing homelessness this year. So in particular, last year, we saw increases in several key renter support programs, some of which are being increased this year, but also programs like eviction prevention in the community and the Toronto Tenant Support Program. And we were able to get those additional investments last year following really strong community advocacy. So good to keep that in mind. Last year, we also saw additional funding for staff to support housing development and to implement the new rent evictions bylaw. So shifting into the capital budgets, the city's proposed 10-year capital budget includes $3.4 billion for housing development. So the majority of this would be dedicated to community housing repairs and city-led and supported rental development projects. As with previous years, we see very modest investments in programs that protect existing affordable housing, so just 3% of the capital budget, including the Multi-Unit Residential Acquisition Program, or MURA, and the city's multi-tenant housing, or MTH, renovation program. And we know from a kind of efficiency and best use of dollars perspective that preserving the existing affordable stock that we have, it's the best bang for our buck and really helps to protect the existing stock of affordable housing and the people that live there. So, definitely an area for ongoing advocacy. And then on the homelessness and shelter side of things, we see $1.1 billion over 10 years, which would primarily be directed towards service improvement and growth, and that includes an additional $209 million for the design and construction of new shelters. So I won't go into too much detail here. This comes straight out of the city's budget documents, but I just wanted to quickly show some of the key outcomes that the city's hoping to achieve with this budget, especially in light of what they were able to achieve in previous years.
Sara, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm just wondering, the ASL interpreters have asked if you could slow down a little bit.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, of course. My apologies. Okay, so looking at the key program outcomes, in terms of housing development, the city has an overall target of approving 65,000 rent-controlled, affordable, and rent-geared to income homes by 2030. And what we can see here on the screen is that most of the 2025 projections for both the approvals of those homes as well as the actual completions are below target. And this speaks to some of the context I mentioned up front, and also what Beth mentioned in their presentation earlier about, those challenges from market conditions, project cost escalation, and inadequate investments, and also changing policy environment from other levels of government. So we'll have to see whether new policy and program changes at the city level will enable it to achieve future housing development targets. On the other hand, we see that MURA, the city's acquisition program, which provides funding to nonprofit housing providers to buy private rental housing that is up for sale and to therefore protect the people that live in those homes. We see that MURA well exceeded its 2025 target and continues to be one of the city's most successful housing programs. When it comes to housing stability services, we see that all of the city's programs came in below the 2025 targets, with the number of households moving into housing from the centralized waiting list, so into social subsidized housing. That came the closest to the targets that were set. We also see the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, or the COB, estimates for 2026 and 2027 are significantly lower than previous years. And this is because the province has yet to confirm its funding for that program. We know, though, that the COB is such a critical support to help transition people out of homelessness and into permanent housing. So definitely want to be able to see other levels of government come in to provide that support. And then when it comes to other renter supports that the city funds, we saw in 2025, the projections for the rent bank came in a little bit above target, while EPIC was a little bit below. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that the additional investments that are proposed for the rent bank this year are going to serve the same number of people that were served last year. And we see that EPIC is actually, the targets are expected to drop next year without new funding being proposed for the program. And we know that housing need, eviction prevention is not decreasing. So really critical programs to keep an eye out for. And again, I won't go too deeply here around homelessness services outcomes, but just to say that while there is some promising improvement in terms of homelessness response, including a reduction in the number of callers that are not matched to a shelter space, we still see that the daily average is 125. So that is 125 people calling in, looking for a shelter space and not able to get one. And we see that that number is targeted to continue for the next couple of years and still very, very high. So again, I won't get too into the details here, but others might have more to share on the homelessness services front. So all of that to say, we've developed a few recommendations. Again, thank you to folks from across the community who've been putting their thoughts towards, what do we want to see the city improve on in this budget, and also comparing to what we saw in last year's budget, where there are a number of renter supports. We also know that in the city's initial consultation in the fall, affordable housing and shelter were identified as the top services requiring increased support by the public, and that has been true for several years. So with that in mind, a few key areas we want to see additional support from the city, and areas that communities and community members can continue advocating for. So first is increasing funding for renter supports. So we know that programs like EPIC and TTSP provide essential supports to renters facing eviction. And so in addition to increasing funding for the rent bank, we want to see expanded investments in those programs. We also know that tenants of multi-tenant housing are among the most vulnerable members of our communities and at increased risk of displacement under the city's new multi-tenant housing framework. So we want to see the city develop targeted programs to support those tenants and protect them from displacement. Second, on increasing funding for affordable housing preservation, we have a couple of programs that we think are really critical. So one is related to the multi-tenant housing framework. It's a renovation program to help operators framework and prevent tenant displacement. We've seen recent changes to that program to improve access, but would also encourage the city to increase funding for the program to ensure it reflects costs that are reported by multi-tenant housing operators. As I mentioned, MURA is one of the city's most successful programs, so we really want to see the city prioritize and maximize funding towards that program. And then alongside increased staffing for Rent Safe TO, we also want to ensure that the city, or rather that those additional staff are completing assessments and repairs in timely fashion, and also want the city to look at ways to expand the scope and impact of the program. Third, when it comes to the city's homelessness response, we want to see increased funding to deliver the city's shelter strategy and uphold standards for safety and other human rights, and to maintain funding for potential increases in refugee and asylum claims. And in terms of the encampment response, wanting to ensure the city's engaging closely with people with lived experience of homelessness, and service providers taking a human rights-based approach to encampments and ensuring access and sufficient supply of supportive housing. And finally, despite securing significant funding commitments from higher levels of government, we know the province and federal government need to contribute more. So we want the city to continue advocating for increased funding to improve access to income supports, including the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, for those levels of government to fund the development and preservation of more affordable housing and to increase shelter capacity and homelessness support programs. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much again for the opportunity, and I'll hand it back to the SBT team.
Thanks so much, Sara. Some of those tables got me very excited. I'm looking forward to taking a look at them in more detail. So some of you may be identifying some questions. We'll be taking questions at the end after all our presenters. And we will also have Melanie from the Toronto Drop-In Network joining us later in the session. And I just want to give a heads up, particularly to Anna and Brandon, that Melanie will be now going on after you. So you'll be jumping forward a little bit. But first, we have a few others, including August, who is our next speaker. August is a campaign manager with the Transit Advocacy Group, TTC Riders, an excellent transit advocacy group. August is a student at Toronto Metropolitan University, and they are from North York and care about livable cities with great transit. Welcome, August.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'll share my screen in a sec. But yeah, I have a very quick budget overview. In the 10 minutes that I have, I'll try to squeeze in as much as I can. But this is the budget pie chart where funding is coming from for 2026 budget. So you'll see that big orange piece, the passenger revenue, that's our fares that we pay every day. And historically, that's actually been a lot higher than 35%. That usually used to be the majority of the budget coming from our fares. And it does explain why we've seen like a lot of fare increases in the past, is because the system is so reliant on fares. Anytime there's a need for more, there's more budget pressures, it ends up coming from the riders' pockets. So now we're seeing more funding come from the city of Toronto and that blue piece of the pie chart. And a lot of that is coming from the property tax. As mentioned earlier by Beth, there's also the provincial funding New Deal that's supporting transit, but that is expiring this year. So that's actually going to be a big issue if we don't see upper levels of government invest more in public transit. You'll find more details about the budget at our website, and I'll go over some of the highlights. So what's in the budget? There's a fare freeze for the third year in a row. There's fare capping. There's some modest service increases. There's also the rollout of community crisis service workers on Line 1 in downtown. There's funding for the bunching and gapping pilot. So essentially, it's a pilot that's trying to make bus and streetcar times more consistent. And that's happening on 10 routes. And there is also Wheel-Trans expansion happening. So what's missing? Well, there's a lack of operating funding from upper levels of government. We want to see faster fare capping rollout. It's currently scheduled for September 2026, which is very close to the election and near the end of the year. We want to see it to come earlier, ideally. There's also missing revenue tools. We want to see lower student fares because students, post-secondary students in particular, are not really benefiting from fare capping at this moment. And there's minimal funding to replace old signage and information on the system. So I'll start off with talking about affordable transit, and that's going to be much of what I talk about today. So we're getting a fare freeze, which is a really big win. It's the third straight year in a row that we've had a fare freeze, and the last time that happened was back when David Miller was mayor a long time ago. So it's a big win. TTC relies more on fares to operate transit than nearly any other agency in North America. So again, that's why our fares often go up anytime there's a budget pressure. So with that very low subsidy, it's very welcome to see measures taken to keep the system more affordable and accessible. This graph basically shows how fares have risen above the rate of inflation over many, many decades. And this third year of a fare freeze kind of helps level it out. It helps bring it back down to where it should be. It's risen, nearly twice the rate of inflation. Next is fare capping, and this is like the biggest cake in the budget for us, I'd say. We've been fighting really long to have fare capping implemented, and really happy to see it. So it's a program that allows transit users to ride free after a certain number of trips in a day, a week, or a month. And in this case, what's being proposed in the budget is a monthly fare cap of 47 trips. Now, with fare capping, it's a pay-as-you-go discount rather than a pay upfront discount like a monthly pass. And you'll find that a lot of the biggest benefactors this year will be Fare Pass users, seniors, and youth. But as the discount progressively deepens, it'll start having a much bigger impact across all riders. So the monthly pass does have a discount for people who take the TTC often, but you have to shell out $156 at the start of the month if you're an adult to pay for it. A lot of people can't afford that. I mean, I've never bought the monthly pass in my life, even though there's been many times where I've wanted to. And so it's the same time of month when rent and utilities are due. So it's really important that we move towards fare capping, which is a lot more fair. It opens up the discount for more people who need that discount. A lot of different cities already have it, in Ottawa, of all places, Hamilton, Edmonton, parts of the 905, like Durham and York, already have it, and lots of cities around the world, like New York and LA. So it's very much a proven measure. So if the 2026 budget passes, fare capping will be capped at 47 trips a month starting in September. And you can see some of the prices that will happen. So it's $155 for adults. It's around the same for adults, and that's because it's a very modest fare cap for 2026. They're only kicking in around $3 million towards it. So they've kept the fare cap to the same level as what the monthly pass costs, basically. But you'll see deeper discounts for youth, seniors, and fare pass users. Now, the 2026 budget also bakes in a lower fare cap of 40 in 2027. And that's what we're really excited for because that brings down the cost to $132 for adults and well below $100 for every other fare group, which is way more affordable than what pass users have to deal with today. And the graphic on the left basically kind of shows how fare capping generally works visually. So this chart shows where we hope to get if the budget passes. You can see how Fair Pass users, people who use the Fair Pass, people who are lower income, the most low income riders in the system, are going to see a 22%, decrease in their monthly maximum transit fare if the fare cap is approved in 2026. And then when it gets deep into 40 trips, it's going to go down to even 38% less than what it is. And that's really good. Right now, people who use the Fare Pass are spending $123 to buy a monthly pass if they can even afford it. And we've done some research in the past which has shown that even though a lot more people are using the Fare Pass program now, they're mostly using single tickets. The number of people who buy the monthly fare pass has stayed flat for the last couple of years. So this really helps expand affordability for frequent transit users. And you can also see how it's going to reduce the monthly fare expenses for people across the board, whether they're adults or youth or seniors. Now there's also investments into increasing service and making it more reliable. So there's a 2% increase in service hours, and that's going to restoring rush hour service on line 1 and line 2, and 6-minute streetcar service on Bathurst, Dundas, and St. Clair. Um, and there's also more Wheel-Trans service. There is a new facility that's being built. There's an 8.7% increase in Wheel-Trans trips in 2026. So they're budgeting for a lot more people using Wheel-Trans in the city. And of course, didn't put it in the slides, but family of services is not currently being advanced this year as far as we know. So that's good news as well. Um, our budget messaging is as follows. We expect the mushy middle of city council, the ones that aren't always very happy about fare freezes and fare capping and things like this. We'll try to derail plans to invest in a lower fare cap for the budget in 2027, because that 40 trip fare cap is going to cost quite a bit more. So our main messaging is to defend these affordable wins, defend the fare freeze, and defend the fare cap. We're going to call to look into rolling out fare capping earlier than September 2026 and also, speed up the implementation of that 40 trip cap to really deepen affordability. We're also going to call to lower post-secondary fares as well. Right now, post-secondary students either have to buy the $128 monthly pass or they just have to pay the adult fare. There's no in between. So we also want to push to see a reduction to the fare cap to 38 in 2027 so it can actually benefit post-secondary students as well. Of course, supporting the safety, service, and maintenance investments that are already made in this budget, and we'll continue to push for alternate revenue tools and funding from upper levels of government that we so badly need. And yeah, the last thing I want to share is we have a deputation training tonight at 7 p.m. if you wish to sign up. And there's my email if you want to reach out to me. Thanks.
That was excellent. Thank you so much, August. Really, really helpful details and very exciting about the fair camping. So next we have How-Sen from Toronto Environmental Alliance. How-Sen has been a climate and climate justice campaigner for nearly 25 years and has worked with many different environmental organizations. And between 2016 and 2019 was the Canadian digital campaigner at Stand Earth, where he worked under Indigenous leadership to oppose the Trans Mountain Pipeline. How-Sen strongly believes that climate progress in Toronto will lead to positive climate action across the country. He holds an environmental studies degree or degrees from McGill and Yale and is certified in organizational greenhouse gas accounting. Wow, and lives in downtown Toronto. Welcome, How-Sen.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everybody. I think we have about 10 minutes and we're already behind, so I'm going to try to be relatively quick here. Um, Climate change in Toronto, primarily, I mean, as it is with a lot of other places, is basically this. We have to protect Torontonians from a changing climate now, while at the same time cutting emissions to protect us in the future. In general, and this is just a general rule of thumb, climate action tends to increase affordability and things like safety and health in the long run, but also tends to have challenging upfront costs. Um, and this is kind of what we're looking at in the future, right? So this is under what's known as a high emissions scenario. So if like emissions globally continue to be really, really high, we can expect by the year 2100, 78 days above 30 degrees Celsius, and then over 900 days over 900 millimeters of annual precipitation. So those are significant increases in the Toronto area, and these are projections based off of international and national climate modeling. What's important to note is that any kind of reduction in emissions now will actually help us reduce and make us safer in the future, and doesn't really matter where you are in the world. And so what we do actually now will make the difference between like a medium emissions scenario or a high emissions scenario or an extremely high emissions scenario, and that will have an impact on what the climate will look like in the future. This is kind of where we're at right now. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, even though I could if I wanted to. But generally speaking, if you kind of look at from 2004 to 2014, most of the emissions in the city of Toronto primarily coinciding with the provincial coal phase out in the electrical grid. And kind of since then, we've been more or less flatlined in terms of our emissions. In fact, if you look at our 2020 target, which is that little 2020, that little yellow square there, you'll see that we hit our 2020 greenhouse gas emissions target as far back as 2011. And so now what we're trying to do is get down to the 2025 and the 2030 and the 2040 targets on the right. It's possible because the where technology is now these days is can actually make it happen, but it will require significant motion and it requires significant investment. And these are two different ways of looking at the same pie of greenhouse gas emissions that are produced inside the borders of the city of Toronto. On the left is what section of the economy, so buildings, transportation, and waste. And on the right is fuel type and the use of that fuel. And you'll notice one clear thing here is even though people talk about transportation a lot, which is a very significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions, the majority of our greenhouse gas emissions actually come from buildings and actually comes from the burning of natural gas, also known as fossil gas, in order to provide heating for those buildings. And so these are significant challenges we need to move forward on. In terms of the budget, what Toronto Environmental Alliance likes, here's our top line generally. In general, there are positive investments in heat safety, transit, stormwater, and city corporate emissions. Cutting emissions from buildings continues to be one of the biggest challenges the city has on multiple levels. And we also need much more involvement and investment from both the Ontario and Canadian governments, both of whom have been pulling back on a lot of the previous climate commitments they've made in previous years. Um, some of the investments in climate resiliency in this budget include, as mentioned before, a significant increase in the indoor heat and indoor cooling units for vulnerable residents. It actually looks like they will be expanding the chunk of the population that can even get this, because in the pilot year that happened in 2025, it was primarily for seniors and vulnerable seniors. So actually, they may expand the availability to, for example, families with young children. And they do expect to install over 1,000 new units in 2026. Also, as a side note to that, we are expecting in council to have a maximum heat bylaw, a vote on a max heat bylaw that would set indoor temperatures and rental units to 26 degrees or lower. And we're expecting that to come in May of 2026, so May of this year. Additional investments include investments in flood protection. There's a significant increase in stormwater management in the capital budget, and also in green streets. There's a slight increase in funding for green streets, which includes adding greenery along city roads that would add shade, reduce urban heat, and absorb flood water. So if you ever stood in and like waited for a bus where there's no shade in the middle of a hot summer day, you actually understand how uncomfortable that can be, and how difficult it can be, especially if you don't have indoor cooling in your living space. It can be very, very challenging on multiple levels for a lot of people. The city also is primarily maintaining its existing list of community climate grants. The city provides climate grants for community groups, for outreach and education, and to kind of build up more resilience for community groups. And so that's a list of them on the left. In addition, this year they have an additional $200,000 for Black-led community climate action grants. And so that's new for this year, and we're very pleased with that. In addition, there's continued building decarbonization incentive programs for private buildings in the city that includes, well, they can include publicly built, private or nonprofit buildings. So these are things like a bulk heat program to do fuel switching away from the natural gas boilers. There's a home energy loan program to help primarily single family homes decrease their greenhouse gas emissions through kind of like a more general energy retrofit. And then there's also larger building retrofit programs as well that'll continue helping to finance larger building retrofits. The program is being adjusted this year because the intake of the number of buildings is lower than expected, and so they're trying to rejig the program for the large building retrofit programs to make it more attractive for building managers. We're also quite pleased with the increases to sustainable mobility. You know, everything could be better, obviously. On the public transit front, August already talked about this, but because Transform TO actually calls for transit to be free by 2040, we actually have to continue to increase service while keeping fares low. So talking about like the splitting of the fares and the operating costs to make sure that it's not the fares that are running the operating costs. So seeing that those two move apart from one another is absolutely vital for us to hit our Transform TO goals. And so we're glad to see that trend continue. Now, for cycling and pedestrianization, there's sustained funding to the capital budgets in the year 2026. There hasn't been a significant increase, but there hasn't been a decrease, at least in 2026 either. So those are kind of moving steady. The city also has a carbon budget, so every city division gets help from Environment, Climate, and Forestry Division to identify climate action and their impacts. So for the second year in a row, every city division is actually taking part in this annual carbon budgeting process. the the budgeting process is still kind of incomplete in my opinion, but there's still quite a bit of positive momentum there, so we're pleased to see that. Oh, we don't see. Oh, I'm going up. What we still need in order to reach net zero by 2040, we need to cut around 1 million tons per year. In this budget, they've identified about 200. They're funding and identified about 217,000 tons. So that gives you a sense as to the difference in scale that we need. And so Toronto can't actually do this alone. The pace of climate action needed to hit our net zero demands that all governments work together. So we do need funding and financing from other levels of government. Again, these investments tend to bring returns over time in terms of like direct energy savings, but also things like improved safety and public health. But upfront money continues to be a significant challenge. There are billions of dollars that are already being invested in the city that only need to be diverted a little bit into decarbonization. They will have co-benefits. But again, the city of Toronto does not by itself have the ability to raise enough money to invest in what's needed. So I'll kind of leave it at that. Happy to take any questions people may have at the end of the conversation today.
Thanks so much, How-Sen. That was incredible. That was a great overview. And just moving along, as I noted earlier, Melanie from the Toronto Drop-In Network is having some technical issues, so she'll be joining us at the end to talk about drop-in programs and services. So next, I'd like to invite Brandon, who is with the library local 4948. Brandon has worked at the Toronto Public Library for over 15 years, and most recently at the North York Central Library in the Business Science and Technology Department. Since that time, he's been involved with the union in various roles, including sitting on health and safety committees, executive board, and as the Ontario representative and co-chair for CUPE's National Library Workers Committee. And Brandon was elected president of TPLWU Local 4948 in November 2019. And Brandon likes to say that the strength and resolve of library workers and the communities they serve inspires and motivates him to be a proud advocate for libraries and for the membership he humbly serves. We're really happy to have you on, Brandon. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jen, and thank you to all the previous speakers. I don't have any fancy charts and things like that, so you're going to have to look at my face or, listen to me for the next while. But I did want to give a little bit of an overview of our analysis of the library budget from the perspective of library workers. So I do represent about 2,600 library workers in every corner of the city. We really do value the work that Social Planning Toronto does because a lot of my members actually live in the city of Toronto. So we're your friends, we're your neighbors, and all of the different investments that we advocate for, whether it's housing, transit, or anything else, directly impacts us as residents in the city. So ironically, I did go to the library website just to read up a little bit more on the budget to refresh my memory, but the website's down today. So they're revamping it. And I did manage to find some documents that I had conveniently printed before, so I was able to refer to that. So just to give people a bit of a background, the library is kind of governed by a board. So it's kind of similar to the TTC or other organizations that have kind of a governing body that oversees everything related to the budget. Most of the people on the board are publicly appointed, so they're residents that kind of apply to be on the board, and they're kind of selected through the city. In terms of councillors, we do have two councillors on the board, Deputy Mayor Amber Morley, that represents people in Etobicoke Lakeshore, as people know, and Deputy Mayor Paul Ainsley as well for Scarborough-Guildwood. Before I go into a little bit about the budget for this year, I do want to say I'm a little bit biased, but I do think investing in the library is one of the best things that we can do as a city. We do a lot of work in terms of advocating for safe spaces for youth, for reducing poverty, addressing isolation that seniors face at times in some areas. And so our budget is not big. It's not small, but it's not, as big as some other budgets that you see at the city. But for every dollar that's invested in the Toronto Public Library, it generates over $5 in return. And so it's about 1 billion with a B in terms of all the return on investment that we get for the city of Toronto. So I think that's a very good service to invest in. Again, I'm the president of the Library Workers Union, but I think it's a very good thing that the city has. And I will say that over 90% of the library budget is funded by property taxes. So we do have a little bit of money we sometimes get from grants. We do have an organization that raises money in terms of donations, but the bulk of it comes from the property tax increases. So it's always an interesting conversation to have with people in terms of how do we fund the city that we want. And in the library's point of view, we don't really charge people a lot. They've gotten rid of overdue fines and things like that, and it's meant to be a service that you can kind of access freely and not have any barriers in terms of making use of it. On that note, for this year, so what happens for our budget is that it has to go through the library board first, and the library board makes recommendations as to what they would like the city councilors to ultimately vote on. And as you all know, the mayor gets involved in that as well later in the year when she presents her budget. So back in October, the library board approved a budget increase of about 10.3%. Obviously, that was a recommendation. As I said, it has to go through different channels. And a lot of it was to fund things like the open hours plan, so increasing the times that libraries are open, more libraries open on Mondays and Sundays, for example. Beth talked about things like the financial empowerment series and the crisis and social support services that libraries offer. And a lot of those initiatives were asked for as part of that 10.3%. Later on, the city kind of came back to the library and said, that's a little bit too much. We have a target in terms of where we think the budget should be. Can you have a look at your books and kind of open them up again and see what you can do to reduce that increase request? And they complied with that because that's, what's generally what the divisions do. Some of them are a little more compliant than others, but the library generally likes to kind of toe the line and follow the city direction. And sometimes we have to, advocate and push them a little farther. And that's work that all of us are not are used to doing. So I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, I hope. But the final budget increase that was recommended was about 7.8%, and they took out about $6 million from the overall budget ask. A lot of it they say will not have a direct impact on service, but I always kind of question that when I read about these things. I will say that all of the things that I talked about earlier, it looks like they're still in the actual proposed increase, and some of the things that are not going to be in there is that they're going to get a little bit less money in terms of purchasing library materials, which they did say would result in increased waiting times for people that rely on those, the customers that use the library. Um, and that's basically because the price of buying library materials goes up each year. There's, inflation and there's other kind of things related to ebook lending that cause them to kind of account for spending more and more in each year. And so buying less materials now means that people will have to wait a little bit longer to get access to that. So that's a concerning thing that we have to kind of be aware of. Some of the other changes they say are a little bit minor. So they have what they call an asset replacement program where they will upgrade library devices and things like that, and replace ones that are in need of replacing. They're saying that they can kind of push that a little bit farther until next year, and that it won't have a significant increase on people's ability to access and enjoy their libraries. So that's something that's a little more minor, I think, but does have an impact. And a lot of it, I think, is just motivated by the fact that, there is an election coming up next year. We don't know who's running for councilor or for mayor officially. And I think that everyone's a little bit guarded in terms of, that word that we all kind of refer to in terms of taxes, but it is important to fund the city that we actually want. So we have to always advocate for what we think we all deserve. So, on that note, I'm not going to talk a little bit, I'm not going to talk too much further, but the capital budget was recommended. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but that proposed increase was the exact same that was voted on in October. So that one is going to go ahead. There's a couple of libraries that are expanding, and there will be eventually a brand new library at Etobicoke Civic Center that people may have heard about. And it's going to be a library that's kind of associated with a community center and I believe, I think, a childcare facility and some other things. So it's going to be the 101st library in the city of Toronto, but that won't be opening up until later on, probably in the next couple of years. So, but work is kind of going ahead in terms of planning for that. So where I see the budget is that, it's a modest increase. I think it's fair to say we have a very supportive mayor who believes actually in investing in libraries, which is very refreshing because some of you will remember the days of, former Mayor Rob Ford, who, kind of wanted to close all the libraries way back in the day when he was mayor, so that's not good. And John Tory, of course, was not, as supportive of libraries as the current mayor is. So we're happy to see moving ahead in the right direction, but also wanting to advocate and make sure people are held to account for their decisions and that they listen to the voices of the residents and the people that use the services in the city. In terms of the next steps, we're going to be monitoring the budget. There's a bunch of different meetings that are coming up, and the final budget wrap up, as they call it, is happening on Friday, but it's not really the final one. It's just for the budget committee. And uh, I made a note to tell people that there is a rally that's being planned. I might as well do a pitch for it. It's called the Fund Our City Rally that's happening on the final vote, which is happening at City Council on February 10th. So I'm sure people here will be there anyway, but I've seen some of you at past rallies as well. So just flag that day in your calendar, and it'd be good to kind of pack the chambers and have everybody see that we care about the decisions that are being made at the city. And the last thing I will say before I turn it over to the next speaker is that we do have a website that we use to engage people that care about libraries and the workers that make the libraries operate. And I don't know if it's appropriate for me to type it in the chat, but I can just read it out. It's www.ourpubliclibrary.to. And what happens is if you sign up on that website, our system will kind of determine where you live if you input your postal code. And if there's ever a need to advocate for libraries or to keep you up to date as to what's happening with the budget, it will allow you to kind of send a direct message to your counselor, and you can tweak the message or you can use the template whenever there's something happening that we want you to be aware of. So we do have over 35,000 people already signed up on that website. So some of you are already there probably, but if you do want to add your name to the list of library supporters in the city, it's ourpubliclibrary.to, and you can do that later on. So with that, I think I will conclude, and I look forward to any questions that might come up later.
Thanks so much, Brandon. And it's absolutely appropriate. I saw Melissa put it in the chat. Feel free to add any more details. That's so great. Thanks for your excellent presentation. There's a lot of love for libraries in this room and generally, as you know, and we're really supportive of the increased investments and support all the work that you do. So thanks for all of that. All right, two more speakers, and then hopefully at least a little bit of time for some Q&A. So next, I'd like to invite Anna. Anna Willats, they, has been a Toronto-based social justice activist, organizer, and educator for over 40 years. How is that possible, Anna? Anna is committed to working collectively in a variety of ways for meaningful and progressive socioeconomic and political change from the ground up, and also works with the TPAC, Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. Anna, great to have you.
Great, thank you. I too am going to just talk. I don't have a presentation, so I'll talk about the budget. It's actually, we should have a lot to say about this budget because it's the second biggest one that the city considers. This year they've asked for an increase of $93 million for a total net operating budget of just over $1.4 billion. So it's a very, very big number. And there's lots of room to save money within that budget. We had prepared a deputation fairly simple. We were going to suggest to the police board, the Toronto Police Services Board, we're going to suggest that we save upwards of $40 million by just doing a simple scrapping the rule of 2 officers in a car after dark. So, after dark, because that is a way that anyways, they were going to save about $40 million that way. We also were going to suggest that the city auditor would to speed the time, the response times on calls. So we thought, I think the city is, the police have only implemented a couple of those recommendations, and we wanted to see the police implement all of the recommendations of the city auditor. So those were a couple of things that we were doing. Instead, so we went to a meeting of the budget committee of the police board, consisting of 3 of the 7 board members. And we were going to send a letter in to that meeting, because we figured we'd present to the entire police board later on. And unfortunately, at that meeting of the committee, they moved a motion at the beginning of the meeting to allow the police budget to be introduced in the meeting as a walk-on item. Sorry about the technicalities, but it was, and that deprived the public of any notice. As a result, no members of the public had any notice, and then thus none of the public, including groups such as ours, were able to address the board on the budget. So, and at the end of that meeting, the board gave the police service exactly what it asked for. So no questions, no public input, and it was passed. So it's gone to city council. That has gone forward of $1 billion has gone to them. And so we decided to, we went to the mayor, asking her to intervene because we figured she could do something, and she's not taken that up. So we really can't present anything to the police. I would say like I said, there's lots of good ideas. For example, the homicides have gone down 50% less in 2025. Assaults fell by 10%. Thefts gone down by 50%. Break and enters have gone down by 30%, and on. Sexual assault violations have gone down. That's a great place to think about reducing the budget, because obviously it's gone. It has gone down. Unfortunately, what we see though is that people think, while they may be safer, people think that a lot of the disorder we see as a result of people being homeless, and people being with mental illness issues in public. People think they're unsafe, and this would be an ideal time to move the police intervene with homeless people, and move that over to the people in the homeless sector, and take them funding with it, and move it over. Move that over so they could do something about it. But unfortunately, we're not going to see that this year. So for the budget, I think that people have to show up at the city budget and say, why has the city council not not right, sorry. City council has to insist that this budget be lower, and I don't know if they will. Unfortunately, it's hard to say if they will, but that is what we have to see. And that's about all I can say about that, because unfortunately, it doesn't seem that the police have any appetite to lower their budget. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Anna. Excellent points. This is one area where we have not seen the kinds of things that communities have been calling for in the last couple of years. We will continue to name the challenges in this area and the need to use more funding for community investments rather than the enforcement approach. But we can also take a long view on this as well. So, our last and final speaker, Melanie Joy, will be joining us. Melanie is a queer white settler born on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples and now calls Toronto home. They studied social work at Toronto Metropolitan University and have spent over 2 decades working in the homelessness sector in a range of roles, including harm reduction, eviction prevention, community education, and nonprofit leadership. In their current role as the executive lead of the Toronto Drop-In Network, Mel works to enhance the capacity of Toronto's network of drop-in centers, working toward a socially just Toronto, which is safe, healthy, and inclusive. I'm so glad you were able to join us, Melanie, despite the technical challenges. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jen, and to everyone else at SPT for putting this on. Yeah, my name is Mel. Nice to see you all. And before I start, I'll just share a little bit about the work that the Toronto Drop-In Network does. So we are a member-based organization. We have over 50 organizations that are part of our network, and they run about 56 unique drop-in centers across the city of Toronto. There's a little bit more information on our website. I just put it in the chat. And as Jen mentioned, I have been having some technical difficulties today. My computer died about an hour ago, and I lost all my notes for today, including the deputation I was going to be giving tomorrow. So I don't have a presentation, but I have written some things down from memory so that I can speak a bit about what the budget looks like for drop-ins. So the kind of like the tone, the vibe right now that's happening in drop-ins. We did a needs and capacity assessment in November of last year. And we also partnered with the University of Toronto, the Public Good Initiative through the Monk School to do a report on the working conditions and how staff were feeling that are working in drop-ins. And both of those reports have really pointed to the fact that drop-in staff are feeling overwhelmed. They're seeing an increase in participants coming through their doors. But they're not seeing an increase in resources or in their salaries. So those are some of the areas that we've been focusing on to provide like workplace wellness for staff. We had a wellness conference recently, and a lot of the advocacy that we're doing now for the city budget is around increasing staff salaries and supports for staff that are trying to meet the need of a growing need of doubled homelessness has doubled, as we all know. We've had supervised consumption sites close and be defunded. And drop-ins essentially are they're a real barometer of how the rest of the sector is doing, because we don't just support people who are experiencing homelessness, but we also support people who are precariously housed, seniors, youth, and people who use drugs. So when these other services become oversaturated or they decrease, we catch all of that because we are so low barrier. So the need is growing, and it's actually the city budget is not looking too bad, I have to say, for drop-ins. There we did see an increase of 679,000, which compared to like other folks today, we are happy about that there is an increase. We haven't seen a cut in funding. How that works out percentage-wise is about a 5% increase from last year, and which essentially covers like a cost of living increase about 5%. How that looks in reality though is a little bit different because this year compared to last year, there's one less project being funded through this budget line. I did speak to city staff, and they haven't defunded any projects. There's just been a reallocation of funding. So one of the projects was absorbed into another funding stream. So the increase that we're seeing is actually being spread out amongst fewer projects, which means that the increase, if you break it down, is actually about a 9% increase from last year. Like that's what the sites that are being funded are going to feel. So we're also happy about that. Um, the one area that we've been advocating for, like I mentioned through this study, um, is an increase of like the base salaries for staff, and it hasn't been clear about where this 9% increase, if that's going to be going to staff salaries or not. Um, we think not, because the city was pretty explicit in the breakdown of how they're funding shelters this year. So they've enhanced, while they have cut overall operation budgets and increased capital, they have allocated $7 million to stabilize the shelter system and harmonize operating and working conditions for nonprofit staff. So that's the type of investment that we're looking for drop-in staff as well. During the pandemic, there was an increase of like $4 an hour for shelter staff because they were essential. It was deemed an essential service. We saw the same increase for drop-in staff. So during the pandemic, drop-in staff were considered an essential. I argue they are still essential, but we're not seeing that same comparison when we look at the investment from the city for staff salaries. So that's definitely something we're going to be advocating for, which works out to be about 1.5 million increase over the $679,000 increase. So overall, we're looking for about a $2 million increase to the drop-in budget. In order for us to be able to sustain the staffing and, essentially, obviously, supporting the participants that access our services. So that was brief, high level, but I'm happy that I was able to still attend today, and happy to answer any questions once we get to that point. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mel. And we're at that point now, finally, at the question and answer point, although we really only have a few minutes left for that. So I suggested in the chat that folks put their questions in the chat, and we'll work through the questions as quickly as we possibly can. Really appreciate you being able to join us, Melanie, even though all of those challenges and losing